On this show, meet Colonel Lewis S. Wallace Jr. His 49 years of federal service has been distinguished by numerous intelligence, diplomatic, and academic leadership positions. In 1988, Colonel Wallace was confirmed by President Reagan to serve as an Air Force military attaché at the American Embassy in Moscow, Russia. His high-profile positions include Chief of Intelligence, Inspection Division, Senior Planner for Military Strategy and Policy, Mission Commander, Deputy to the President, Joint Military Intelligence College, Lecturer in Military Affairs at Harvard University, recipient of numerous military decorations. Colonel Wallace has over 3,000 flying hours. Do I have your interest? Yes, he's amazing, and I'm thrilled to welcome to the show Colonel Lewis S. Wallace. Welcome to the show, Colonel Wallace.
Thank you, Ingrid. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, I'm pleased. I'm thrilled, actually, that you accepted my invitation. Well, first, let's tell our viewers where you're from.
Well, Ingrid, I'm a D.C. native. I was born and raised right here in the nation's capital.
Wow.
And I have a kind of an interesting background. I grew up in the inner city of Northwest Washington.
Oh my goodness.
During the 1950s when Washington, D.C. was still segregated.
Interesting.
We were very poor. My family was very poor. And every day was a struggle just to survive, because in the area that we live, we had to deal with crime, drugs, violence, and street gangs on a daily basis.
So this is nothing new. My goodness, when you hear what's going on in Washington.
Oh, no, this is nothing new. This is nothing new.
Wow.
And what saved me from a life of crime and violence were two loving parents. I was fortunate to have both of my parents at home. My father worked as a construction worker, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom.
Beautiful, beautiful.
So they gave me the love and inspiration to excel in life. And I must tell you something that was very tragic during my childhood. I lost two of my brothers.
Oh my goodness.
One died of an overdose of drugs.
No way.
And my other brother is serving a 30-year sentence in the federal penitentiary.
Oh my word. I'm glad you're telling this story, because when you read a bio such as yours, all I thought immediately was, this is a gentleman who's had a golden spoon, you know, born with a golden spoon in his mouth. And it seems like you're telling us a different story. That's not the, so what high school did you go to?
I graduated from McKinley Technical High School, which at the time was a very progressive school. I had very excellent teachers who inspired me and made sure that I was prepared for whatever profession I wanted to go in. Some of the courses that I took in high school are quite surprising. I took architectural design. I took electronics. I took aviation.
Wow.
In fact, we even had a simulator in the classroom, and I learned how to fly when I was in the 11th grade.
I love it. I love it. What an inspiration. But what drew you to the Air Force? Because I saw something that you got drafted. What went on?
Well, in 1965, during the Vietnam War, Uncle Sam came knocking, and I got my draft notice.
Okay.
I was drafted into the Army.
Ooh.
And I spent 2 weeks in the Army, and then I decided being a soldier was not my calling.
Okay.
So I
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
All right.
So I requested a transfer to the Air Force.
Okay.
My transfer was approved, and I went to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas for basic training.
Okay.
And while in basic training, I was given a test called the Language Aptitude Test.
Oh.
And according to the Air Force, if you could pass this test, they could teach you any spoken language.
Okay.
So the test was a made-up language. I think it was some dialect of Yiddish. And during the test, you had to learn the vocabulary, grammar, and syntax of this made-up language during the actual test.
Wow. Wow.
And so I passed the test with flying colors.
Oh, my word.
And they sent me, the Air Force sent me to Syracuse University to study Russian. So that was the beginning of my Air Force career. But I had other languages previously. I had studied French and Latin in high school, and during my first 2 years in college, I went to DC Teachers College. I studied Spanish, and my instructor wanted me to become a Spanish teacher.
So that's where it comes in. Wow, DC Teachers College. So from there, then you were talking about I read that you worked on your degree. You were at Syracuse, and then how did Alaska come into that?
Well, when I graduated from the basic training course, I was assigned to Fairfax, Alaska, as an aircrew member.
Okay.
And I spent a few years in Alaska flying around the world on transport and reconnaissance aircraft.
Wow.
And also at that time, I was married. I had a young child, and basically I was gone most of the time.
Gone most of the time.
Yeah, and I wanted to continue my education because I graduated from high school in 1962, and it took me 10 years to get my bachelor's degree in Russian studies from Syracuse.
That's what you call tenacity. I mean, you were letting it go, huh?
Determination.
And determination.
Yes.
Wow, and look at you now. So then, I was reading, and, you've had so many wonderful positions. What is the one that has just given you the greatest, satisfaction?
Well, by far my greatest satisfaction was serving our country as a assistant air attaché at the American Embassy in Moscow.
And we're showing pictures of that because we have some beautiful pictures of you and your lovely wife, Ann Wallace, and it's pretty amazing. So you met quite a few people there too. I was looking at that. Oh yeah,
yes. My job was basically to advise the ambassador on Russian military affairs.
Okay.
Also, my job was to observe and report on developments within the Russian Air Force and the Russian military as a whole.
Wow.
But another one of my jobs was to escort U.S. dignitaries and government officials when they arrived in Moscow.
Oh, I think we have a picture of you with the generals there, a group picture.
Yes, yes.
Nice.
The photo was of one of the first U.S. Soviet military exchanges. A group of U.S. Air Force Surgeon Generals from Bolling Air Force Base were invited to come to Moscow and meet their counterparts from the Soviet Ministry of Defense. And I was selected to be their interpreter and escort during the two-week trip. So we traveled to many cities in the Soviet Union, and I had to learn a lot of the medical terminology, because as an interpreter or a translator, you don't really get to study specific types of terminology. So on my own, I had to bone up on medical terminology.
I guess it's the word in genius and Lewis Wallace kind of like matches. If you look up genius, it must be, because that's really hard. Russian is one thing, and then also that's pretty amazing. I saw that you were a commander during Operation Hope. What was that about?
Oh, Operation Provide Hope was a U.S. Air Force operation to provide food, medical supplies, and medicine to the newly established republics after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Wow.
And it began in 1992. In February of 1992, the U.S. Air Force flew 65 missions of C-5 and C-141 aircraft to 10 former Soviet republics, 24 different cities. And my job as mission commander was to organize and lead the airlift. I was stationed on the ground in various locations in the former Soviet Unions to assist the air crews when they landed, and also ensure that all of the goods got to the proper location.
Wow. Wow. Now, you and I were talking, and it just touched my heart. You were telling me a story about President Bush, Barbara Bush, when she came to visit. She came over to Russia?
Yes, this was in 1979. In 1978, December of 1978, devastating earthquake hit the Soviet Republic of Armenia. And as a result of the earthquake, 50,000 people were killed, 130,000 people were injured, and over 500,000 people were left homeless.
Wow.
And for the first time since the end of World War II, Soviet President Gorbachev requested assistance from the U.S.
Well, that's monumental.
Yes, yes. And the U.S. took the lead, but the U.S. and another 112 countries participated in this massive relief operation. They provided food, medical supplies, search teams, relief supplies, shelter, temporary shelter for the Armenian citizens who suffered during this very traumatic earthquake.
And so what was Mrs. Bush's approach when she came to Russia?
Well, after the earthquake, the embassy sent me to Yerevan, Armenia, which is the capital of Armenia, to organize the U.S. relief effort. And in, I believe it was February of 1989, the First Lady, Barbara Bush, made a trip to Armenia to transport 50 injured Armenian children back to the United States for treatment. They had a lot of very serious injuries because of the earthquake. I organized the airlift for the First Lady, and I wished her well on her flight back to Washington. Okay. But at the last minute, she looked at me and said, "Colonel, I want you to go with us back to Washington."
What did you do?
Well, you can't say no to the First Lady, even though I didn't have authorization from the embassy to go back to Washington. I said, "Yes, ma'am," and she said she wanted me to go on this flight because I spoke fluent Russian and I would be a comfort to the injured children during the long flight back to Andrews Air Force Base. And when we arrived at Andrews, there were representatives from hospitals all over the United States, and they transported the injured children to various hospitals for treatment.
That's powerful. That's powerful. That really is. So, what did your commander say when you called back?
Well, I couldn't call back until I got to Washington.
Okay.
So I called back and said, I told my boss, the general, the defense attaché, that I was in Washington, D.C., and I needed an airline ticket back home to Moscow.
Wow.
But
wow.
while I was in Washington, I did have a chance to visit my mother for a few days.
It's beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, so that is like pretty exciting, you know, because you're helping children, and they're what. In terms of your languages, you speak several. What gives you like the greatest, when you look at your career, what gives you like the greatest satisfaction and say, well, golly, I'm so glad I did this?
Well, I think my greatest satisfaction is learning the Russian language. And I didn't just learn the language, I studied the Russian culture, history.
Oh, more than that.
Yes.
Okay.
So I was a all-around Russian area specialist, and I have a great affinity for the Russian people. They had suffered a lot over the centuries, but they're basically good people. Wow. And maybe in time the adversarial relationship between the U.S. and Russia will diminish somewhat.
Because you know firsthand.
Yes, while I was getting my master's degree in Slavic languages and literature from Ohio State University, the Air Force sent me as an exchange student to Russia.
Wow.
In 1978.
Wow.
During the height of the Cold War.
During the height of the Cold War. Wow.
Yeah.
So there's a picture of you with General Colin Powell. What's that? When was that picture taken?
That picture was taken at the State Department. General Powell at the time was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he made a special trip to the State Department to award me an humanitarian service award for my participation in Operation Provide Hope. And I really appreciated the general coming all the way to the State Department to give me this award.
Wow.
And I must tell you another story. I met General Powell for the first time during Operation Desert Storm, when I was working as an intelligence specialist and chief in the Department of Defense Joint Intelligence Center. One morning, I got a call from General Powell's office, and he said, well, the secretary said, the general wants you to come right away and give him a briefing on the air situation in Iraq.
Just like that?
Just like that, yes, because they had scheduled a Pentagon press briefing in that afternoon where the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Cheney, and General Powell, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, were briefing the press on what was happening in the war.
Wow.
So after I gave my briefing to General Powell, just the two of us, he looked at me and said, "Colonel, I want you to come to the briefing with us." Yeah.
Love it.
And I looked at him and said, "Yes, sir."
Seems like no is never in your vocabulary.
No. So here we are on stage in the Pentagon briefing room, the Secretary of Defense, the Chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and me on the stage.
Wow, just like that. That's sweet. And now there's also a wonderful picture with you and Condoleezza Rice.
Yes, I met Dr. Rice in 1990 when she was Senior Director for Soviet and East European Affairs on the National Security Council.
I see.
She had come to Moscow for a series of briefings and discussions in the Kremlin, and by chance I saw her at the ambassador's residence one day. And being a fellow African American, she came up to me and we started a conversation. And she told me, she said, you know, I would like to go someplace and just relax. So I invited her to our home, and she stayed 5 days with us at our quarters at the American Embassy. And we have been in touch ever since. And the photo was at the Department of State, because every year the Secretary of State gives a big reception. And she invited me and my wife to the reception. And we had a real nice chat. And one other thing, Dr. Rice is a very fluent Russian speaker. So
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Really?
So while we were in Moscow, we used to go shopping together, and the Russians would really look at us. Here are two African Americans that were speaking fluent Russian.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
So, and then I saw that you also taught at Harvard too?
Yes. I was blessed to be selected as one of the 16 U.S. Air Force National Defense Fellows. And I was stationed at Boston University in an institute called the Institute for the Study of Conflict, Policy, and Ideology. And this was a postgraduate fellowship.
Wow.
But while in Boston, I was blessed to teach and lecture at Harvard University in the Center for Information Policy Research.
Wow. Wow.
And also I was published at Harvard.
At Harvard too.
Yes, and my presentations were on developments in Russia, basically a contrast before the fall of the Soviet Union and after the fall of the Soviet Union. Contradictions and comparisons.
Exactly, and it's so important. So we have people who are watching this show, and you know, and I think it's not just young people, but all of us. You know, what has been the key to your success? Because you've, you know, gone through so many things and have succeeded.
I think the key to my success is my determination and my persistence in trying to achieve my goals and my dream in life. When I was 8 years old, I had a very serious talk with my number one cheerleader, who was my mother. And I told my mother, I said, "Mom, I want to be the first African American, in those days, Negro. I wanted to be the first Negro president of the United States."
Wow.
My mother looked at me and said, "Son, in this great country, you can be anything you want to be.
Oh, I love
All it takes is believing in yourself, getting a good education, working hard, and never give up on your dreams."
Never giving up on your dreams. And, you know, and I think that that's what it really is, because apparently your mother was a dream, you know, she encouraged you, she just kept lifting you up to doing this.
Oh yes, she really did. And she was so proud. When I graduated from my basic Russian course at Syracuse, I was the top student out of 250 students in the class, and I gave the valedictory speech in Russian.
Wow, wow.
And I was the first African American to be valedictorian of this program. Right. And both of my parents came to the graduation, and they were so proud of their son.
Oh my goodness.
Of course, I gave my speech in Russian, but they passed out English translations.
Oh my goodness. But you know, that's like wonderful, because I think that's what, you know, what a blessing to have your parents there and to really see that. And we're blessed here to have you. I mean, you have just, I think we need to have you come back and speak again, because you're really encouraging and telling us a story. And I think it's the story that what America makes possible here. I just love what you were saying.
Yes, you have so many opportunities. If you just have to take advantage of them and be persistent. Now, one of my favorite quotes is from my mentor, one of my mentors and colleagues, General Colin Powell.
Let's use that to close out our show. Please tell us, what is the quote?
The quote is that you cannot achieve your goals in life without, your goals in life don't come to you by magic. It takes hard work and perseverance to achieve your goals.
Wow. Well, thank you, Colonel Wallace, for being on Ingrid's World. And you are truly an American hero, and it definitely has been an honor to interview you.
It's been my pleasure.
You've already heard the inspirational quote, so I'm not going to give you the quote that I was going to give because we're going to focus back on General Colin Powell. I'd like to thank you for watching Ingrid's World, and please don't forget to really think about your success and what you are doing to move your dream forward. Thank you for watching. Friend us on Facebook and follow us on InstaWorld, VA, and Twitter and Instagram for instant Ingrid World News. So stay in touch and be a blessing to someone today. And ask yourself the question, who will you inspire today?